Julie here with Sirius Dallas Moon, Venus Day, Venus Hour. Venus is in Gemini. Moon is in degree of exaltation in Taurus, but opposing Pluto. It is still in the ninth house. Now, what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to just renew my oil stuff. I'm going to renew my oil stuff, and I'm going to have a ponder with you because, well, first of all, where's my oil stuff? Certain things that came about, first of all, some of y'all may know that I have tended to the corruption behind, let's say, the Epstein dossier is just one side effect of that. And the reason how it came about to tend to these things was the entrepreneurial mindset that I grew up on. So, growing up millennial, there was this grand wish to participate in business as benevolent activity, and it went all the way to the sexual energy as a tantric union, meaning that if we think about in business, there are several approaches, and it's less discussed, but I'm going to say it. One is that's business. And the that's business is basically justifying everything, seeing business as a war, and seeing war as playing fairly is losing. So this is one business strategy and one combat strategy. Another business strategy is um, basically seeing sexuality as one of the persuasive powers that can get to do good things in the world. And then there is um, kind of like um, a combination of seduction and power. And the people that work like this, by the way, even Bilderbergers, some of them are very capable of doing power exchange in a way that is close to the approach that I will speak about. And in fact, one of the times that I was tortured and um, I don't view, how should I say that? I'm going to touch on my view on sexuality later, but one of the times that I was severely tortured, there was attempts to traffic me, and trafficking. I'm old, okay. I'm no longer, let's say, chronologically 5 years old. They capitalize on the fact that I'm internally a child because those people have pedophilia tendencies. Um, but in a healthy form, it would be the childlike curiosity, um, and this is where all of these things happen in the astral when they are basically attempting to get people to be in certain places or meet certain people. Where and one of the places, and I began to run, kind of like to run away from that. And then one of the instances was they tried to get to a person, and that person's capability was to be both on the recipient and the okay. If for example, if somebody had to go through a humiliation ritual, they would be in their body being humiliated while consciousness, while the person and um and I was like, wait a second, um there's something else that's important to me. And this is the notion that wealth that is actually wealthing goes along with honoring our yes, no, and maybe in bed, but also in business. and as a body, heart, mind, and soul alignment, um, and it's different to the approach of um, okay. Because here when we talk about certain level of business, when people start thinking Bilderberg, start thinking Davos, start thinking world policies, then it's a different playground. Um, and there's always the attempt, if I was taking it back to the times when I was listening to Tim Ferriss, there is always the attempt to bridge in between the entrepreneurial streak and the desire to do good for humanity, whether it's angel investor or as conglomerate or as entrepreneur. Um, um, and at the same time, the awareness that the banking system carries, how should I say that? It's kind of like when you talk about the all-seeing eye, that's what they mean. And the fact that I may have accidentally did satire about that type of banking. But here is the thing: the levels of how should I say that? When people were excluded from trade, and we have to understand that back then, child weddings was not something that was only of, let's say, the Jews. In fact, child sacrifice was prevalent. And think about a person that could no longer do any type of trade, so they have to do banking. And then they had to deal with the basically the people that are the lawmakers of each country, and they and combine these practices and these practices. So we're talking about is what we call corruption is basically various centuries. If we take it to lineages that's been here for various centuries, with various practices that they go by, um, and um, and those practices are nowhere near, and some of these lineages are indigenous. So it's kind of like having to manage between that and that, the the training of the people, um, which is what people did, and this is where people say ritual abuse survivor, and the need to bridge, let's say, resilience and the ability to love and intelligence, which entails in many cases, let's say, acts of treason. Um, the need to evade, where children, a lot would be used to evade. And this is, I guess, how pedophilia was developed. So, yeah, it's a very, very challenging topic, because um, and essentially when we're talking about entrepreneurial mindset now, whether you're a marginalized person or a BIPOC person or First Nation person, entrepreneurial thinking is necessary, because the societal changes that we want to bring about require entrepreneurial thinking. Um, And yet, we can't deny that what generates wealth that actually yields is a union that is actually loving, sensually, erotically, non-erotically, honoring inner child, honoring adult, and so on and so forth. This is why I'm strategically, okay, both pragmatically, and this is where pragmatism and ideology form a union. And a lot of people don't know that because they grew up, let's say, trained by paperclip, and there are various divisions in the mindset, um, even of the elite, that that challenge the notion of sovereign wealth. Now, what I love about placements like Adena Balgedi, and Rao will soon reach Adena Balgedi, is that they allow us to understand what was behind corruption and wealth redistribute. So immediately I think about the Dutch East India taking gold, looting the silver from the banks of Spain. It takes a particular type of people to do that. Um, yeah. Um, and the people that are within, well, let's say these cycles, and I begin with an orange essential oil. Um, constantly try to, Deneb Algedy is kind of like, if you have wealth redistribution simply is, it sounds simple, but when I take back to the silver, where taking gold, bringing silver looks like not a good deal, and I was also laughing about it, but spiritually and energetically, it's basically taking from the abundance that is, which is solar energy, metal, which is good for the heart, and bring in silver, which is good for sanity and emotional well-being. And this is already unification of the sect sun and moon metal. Looting the silver allowed the common Spanish people to buy food. Okay? It is an act of lootery, but it's kind of like stealing from. It ain't like the Spanish banks got the silver right? I mean, they looted. I think it was already China back then with the Opium Wars. The first very. Um, I don't remember if this was the Opium Wars, but this is where Dana Balgedi talks about wealth redistribution that aligns and basically aligns the water. Both the accessibility for clear water, but also the relational. And by the way, people that were, even if I think one could consider that my story was that I was to some degree astrally, let's say, sex trafficked, and they use love bombing, and my perception was to try to reach relaxed arousal and secure attachment, honor erotic, non-erotic self, and I developed my business approach, which is basically aligned with the sexuality that is actually healthy. So people that were physically sex trafficked and later, um, I'm going to stay attuned to Seizure Girl because Seizure Girl was trafficked, and then later she said that she um, basically was um, supposedly selling this type of, okay, what cannot be traded basically. Um, and here we have to understand that a lot of the arguments of women that were said, they were saying they were sex workers, were that, oh, but also let's say when a person works in a company and the company doesn't honor their patents. Gen Z addressed that very well. This is also life energy trafficking. And that is also, now, to go from point A to point B is meeting our needs in the most adaptable way and require for something different, because I can't deny the fact that I was, let's say, I'd actually love bombed, and then I would try to find my equilibrium within, insist on relaxed arousal, and insist on the sensuality for me in a way that I enjoy it. And then it was like, well, also when it comes to business, a deal that honors my interest is also on that. And this is where this business approach, or aligning with this business approach, and I have midheaven and mula, so people can't claim for me to be naive when I talk about that. It is aligning with that approach. Even when we think about, let's say, the trafficking rings, then the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, at least as per testimony of Anneke Lucas, they were not themselves participating in raping the children, and it is not impossible, because they were excluded from trade, that they were trying to climb up the ladder by holding these trafficking rings. And for example, the dissociation was both serving their control over the children, um, and this is where um, it would still harm them. It would still harm them. This is why when Anneke Lucas was, as young child, really resisting this type of things, then one of the Rockefellers had a spiritual experience. Now, of course, a supportive Neptune aspect can very well generate that. And right now I have Neptune sextiling my Chiron, and I use that as a privilege to talk about these issues and to talk about these training methods, because if we train people to align, okay, to honor erotic, non-erotic self, and so on and so forth, then our wealth actually welts, and people can have loving relations and be less worried about treason. Um, I think anybody at this juncture of Mars Aries, it is a decan um, of Mars, and I really like the Threads of Fate elaboration on that decan of Mars and Venus, where they can be something. Mars is having to assert herself, and Venus is union. And it's a business decan, it's an entrepreneurial decan. Lunar nakshatra, it would be associated with Ravati, and later with Ashvini. Ashvini is a healer of healers. And this is what takes us from the previous business approaches that either believe that if people play fair, they've already lost, or that something is business, or they try to um, appease or flirt with the sexuality and are very competent of having an equal exchange. Um, but it's kind of like they're trying to appease with something that cannot be traded. And this is where, not, how should I say that, not to trade that is going to get a better yield business wise. Now, I understand that it's difficult for the people within certain societies, which is why I speak up about the training method. That basically, if we think about whether it's the paperclip or the MK Ultra, the MK often, this training method is not superior to the world that's actually wealthy, and to pose it as something that the people exposed, let's say for the Epstein dossiers, can align themselves to as recovery and rehabilitation, is something that's going to be the thing that changes everything, particularly when we think about the big entrepreneurial projects, because what we have is a mixture of people that, let's say, now here is another factor when people talk about the enlightenment as, let's say, where they would target tenants and then would put them to make a mess and so on and so forth. Again, we need to think about aligning to, that each sovereign is aligned to. And also with the changing of chirons, I think that the Gen Z, turning the Gen Zers into Mayans and Aztec, was a miss, because they authentically spoke about what us millennials had to pretend it to ourselves, that we can compromise when we try to get into a job, and then people were like judging us, like, why didn't you say so? But hey, Gen Z said so. And I think it's a grand miss, um, because it's another generation that's very entrepreneurial and very competent of doing things that are of great good to society, and to transition. When we think about um, currency, this has the potency to alleviate a lot of the corruption that we see, that makes it impossible to do banking. Now I have to think about the Zero Usury Bank of Amsterdam, and how the silver was missing, but they were taking the silver from the banks in Spain, now from the people. And that's then a Balgadi. It's like, what's better than a 100% zero usury bank? Aligning the currency so that the common people can buy food. Um, yeah, the sandalwood, just just a tiny bit of sandalwood. Um, so um, when we think about um, these alignments, they also prevent people from having sexualities that people would say that they are survivors of ritual abuse when they, particularly because people will be able to honor the feminine and have more satisfying intimate relations and loving relations and orgasmic birthing. And I think the most, if I would think, if I had to think about, if I would be, let's say, a legacy of wealth family, I would want the birthings to be orgasmic birthings. and of course the wealth to align the wealth in the world towards orgasmic birthing for the world. Okay, that's the point of having, let's say, Mirev and Mula, which Deneb Algedi actually sextiles. Um, so would I want to speak that publicly? Of course. I'd need to be defended somehow. um, yeah. um, so um, okay, Angelica oil, Archangel Angelica. And now, if we think about the challenge, what are my challenges as client to, let's say, buying businesses that have, even by the taxes that they pay, that they're not aligned with Denebalgadi, because this last deacon is also sextile. The last deacon of Aries is sextile Denebalgadi, and I would notice that either I would not have the money, or there would be something that would be interfering. And this is the curation, I think, is that it is that wealth redistribution, so that the business will not have to do the type of crime that does not align with the Nabalgadi. What do I mean by that? To steal from the silver from the bank so that the Spanish people will have food and not die in famine, and not be susceptible to be trafficked, for example, is okay, is something that I'm absolutely okay with. And it's something that, let's say, international trade rules need to accommodate for. It's kind of like, hey, that was lottery, but it aligned the currency, and the economy needs to work in favor of the people and in favor of orgasmic birthing. So kind of like things are beginning to align properly. Palma Rosa. Um, a couple of thanks to the inspirations. Um, First of all, Annika Lucas and the podcast. Um, Annual week. There are hidden thanks that I cannot name. Um, Astrology podcast and the Capox. Um, Basically for the knowledge about astrological talismans. And indeed, I have. Well, I'm gonna have to stop the recording. I have a little bit of a case here.